carefully and to know when to stay silent. Silence is not about suppressing your feelings or allowing others to walk all over you. It's about wisdom, timing, and faith. It's about trusting that God sees the full picture even when you don't. By keeping your mouth shut, you're creating space for God to move in ways that you cannot. You're allowing His peace to guide your heart and His wisdom to guide your actions. There will be moments when God will prompt you to speak, and when He does, your words will carry a power and clarity that only comes from obedience to His timing. But until then, rest in the knowledge that silence can be your strongest weapon in spiritual warfare. Trust that in your silence, God is not silent. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating events and moving pieces into place. He is preparing the way for you even when you can't see it. When you surrender the need to speak or to justify yourself, you are demonstrating a profound trust in God's sovereignty. You are saying, God, I trust you to fight for me. I trust you to be my vindicator. I trust you to make things right in your time and your way. Think about Jesus. When He stood before His accusers, He didn't defend Himself with a flood of words. He remained silent, trusting that God's plan would unfold perfectly. His silence was not a sign of defeat, but a demonstration of strength and obedience. And in the end, God's plan was fulfilled in a way that changed the course of history. In the same way, when you hold your tongue and trust in God, you're positioning yourself for victory. You're allowing His perfect will to come to pass in your life. You're stepping out of the way and letting Him do what only He can do. This doesn't mean it will be easy. There will be times when every fiber of your being will want to respond, to explain, to justify. But in those moments, remember the power of silence. Remember that sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing at all, but trust God to handle the situation. Silence is not about passivity, it's about strategic surrender. It's about choosing to let God's wisdom guide you instead of reacting impulsively. It's about placing your faith in His ability to work things out for your good. And when you do, you will see His hand moving in your life in ways you never expected. The world teaches us to speak our truth, to be heard at all costs, to never back down. But God's way is different. His way is higher, wiser, and more powerful. He calls us to be still and know that He is God. He calls us to trust in His strength and not in our own. He calls us to walk in faith, knowing that His plans for us are good, even when we don't understand what's happening. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where you're tempted to speak out, pause, take a deep breath, seek God's guidance, ask Him what He wants you to do. And if He tells you to be silent, trust that it's for a reason. Trust that your silence is paving the way for His victory in your life. By keeping your mouth shut in moments of conflict or uncertainty, you're demonstrating maturity and spiritual growth. You're showing that you're no longer ruled by your emotions, but by your faith in God. You're walking in obedience, even when it's hard. And that kind of obedience always leads to blessing. When you choose silence, you're also creating space for others to hear God's voice. Sometimes our words can drown out what God is trying to say. By staying silent, you're allowing His truth to shine through. You're giving Him room to work in the hearts of those around you, and you're positioning yourself to receive His peace, His wisdom, and His favor. Silence doesn't mean you're giving up. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're strong enough to trust God with the outcome. It means you're wise enough to know that your words are not always the solution. And it means you're faithful enough to believe that God's plan is better than anything you could ever say or do. So today, make a decision to trust God with your silence. Choose to hold your tongue when you feel the urge to speak out of frustration or fear. Choose to be still and let God move. And watch as He works miracles in your life that you never thought possible. Your silence is not empty. It's filled with faith, strength, and trust in the one who holds your future. So rest in that silence. Rest in the knowledge that God is working on your behalf. And know that when the time comes for you to speak, your words will be filled with power, purpose, and the wisdom of God. We are saying that we believe His judgment and timing are far better than our own. Silence in these moments is not a sign of weakness, but of tremendous faith. It shows that we are relying on God's power rather than our own ability to persuade or prove our innocence. There is a strength in that surrender, a deep assurance that we are protected by the one who sees all and knows all. God's way of defending us often goes beyond what we expect or understand. Sometimes He will use the very things that were meant to harm us to elevate and bless us. He may allow misunderstandings or hardships to refine our character, deepen our dependence on Him, and prepare us for greater blessings ahead. What we perceive as a setback can often be the setup for God's greater plan. It's not easy to hold our tongues when we feel misjudged or attacked. Everything within us may want to set the record straight. But God calls us to trust that He sees the bigger picture and is already at work, even when we cannot see what He is doing. Choosing silence is choosing to trust God's love for us and His promise that He will work all things for our good. There is wisdom in knowing when to be silent and when to speak. Our words should be thoughtful, intentional, and guided by the Spirit. When we rush to speak in defense or frustration, we often end up saying things we later regret. But when we pause, pray, and ask for God's direction, our words are more likely to reflect His truth, love, and wisdom. Silence is not just about keeping our mouths shut. It's about opening our hearts to God's leading. It's about creating space for Him to speak to us and through us. In those moments, when we choose silence over reaction, we allow God to be our guide. We surrender control and make room for His Spirit to bring peace, healing, and clarity. God is not asking us to be silent forever or to suppress our voices when they are needed. There will be times when He calls us to speak truth, stand up for justice, or share His love with the world. But when He does, our words will carry more weight because they are rooted in His wisdom, not our emotions. They will be spoken with purpose, confidence, and grace. Trusting God with our silence is an act of worship. It's acknowledging that He is sovereign over every situation and that we don't have to strive in our own strength. It's choosing to rest in His promises and rely on His power. And it's a powerful way of showing the world that we are confident in the one who fights for us. When we embrace silence as a tool for spiritual growth and trust in God's timing, we begin to see the fruit of that surrender. Relationships may heal, misunderstandings may clear, and situations that seemed impossible may shift in ways we never anticipated. Even when things don't turn out the way we hoped, we can have peace knowing that we followed God's lead and entrusted the outcome to Him. In every season of life, there will be moments when we are called to be still and let God move. These moments may challenge us, but they also hold the potential for great spiritual growth. They teach us patience, humility, and dependence on God. They deepen our faith and strengthen our character. And they prepare us for the blessings and opportunities that God has in store. Silence is not the absence of action. It is a deliberate choice to trust in God's action. It is a declaration of faith that says, God, I trust you more than my need to be heard. I trust you more than my desire for control. I trust you to fight for me, to defend me, and to make things right in your perfect time. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where you feel the urge to speak, pause, take a deep breath, pray for God's guidance, and if He calls you to be silent, trust that there is a purpose behind that silence. Trust that He is working all things for your good and that His plan is far greater than anything you could achieve on your own. By choosing silence, you are choosing faith over fear, wisdom over impulsiveness, and trust over control. You are choosing to align your heart with God's will and to walk in His peace. And in doing so, you are positioning yourself for the victory that only He can bring. Your silence is not empty. It is filled with purpose, power, and the presence of God. It is an act of surrender that invites His Spirit to move in your life, and it is a testimony to the world that you serve a God who is faithful, loving, and always at work on your behalf. So rest in the silence. Trust in God's timing. And know that in His hands, even your quietest moments are part of a beautiful divine plan. We are choosing to believe what God says about us rather than the lies the enemy wants us to internalize. It's a way of declaring that our identity is rooted in God's love, grace, and truth, not in our mistakes, circumstances, or what others say about us. In choosing silence, we allow God to speak over us instead of allowing the enemy to manipulate our thoughts and words. Sometimes the silence we are called to is not just about restraining our voices, but about listening. God often speaks in a still, small voice, and it's in the quiet moments that we can hear Him most clearly. When we're constantly speaking or filling the silence with noise, we may miss His gentle guidance. Choosing silence gives us space to be attuned to His Spirit and receive the direction, encouragement, or correction that we need. Silence also demonstrates humility. It's an acknowledgement that we don't have all the answers and that we're willing to wait on God's wisdom instead of rushing ahead with our own understanding. It shows a deep dependence on God, trusting Him to lead us in the right direction rather than leaning on our own impulses or emotions. In moments of conflict, silence can be a tool of peace. Instead of escalating a situation with harsh words or defensive remarks, we can choose to hold our tongues and allow God's Spirit to work. This doesn't mean ignoring injustice or failing to address important issues, but it does mean responding in a way that reflects God's love and wisdom. Silence can de-escalate tension and open the door for reconciliation and healing. Choosing silence in moments of uncertainty or temptation is also a way of guarding our hearts. When we refrain from speaking out of fear, doubt, or frustration, we prevent ourselves from planting negative seeds that may grow into bitterness, anxiety, or regret. Instead, we choose to dwell on God's promises and allow His truth to take root in our hearts. It's important to remember that silence doesn't mean passivity or weakness. It's an active choice to trust God, rely on His timing, and surrender our desires for control. It takes great strength to remain silent when everything within us wants to react, speak up, or take matters into our own hands. But that strength comes from knowing who God is and trusting that He is working all things for our good. In those moments when we are tempted to speak rashly or act impulsively, it's helpful to pause and pray. Asking God for guidance allows us to shift our focus from our circumstances to His sovereignty. It reminds us that we are not alone and that we have a loving Father who is ready to guide us, comfort us, and fight on our behalf. When we surrender our words to God, He can use them for His glory. Instead of speaking words of frustration or anger, we can speak life, hope, and encouragement. Instead of tearing others down, we can build them up. Our words become a reflection of God's character, and through them, we can be a light to those around us. God's timing is often different from ours, but it is always perfect. What may seem like a delay to us is actually part of His plan to prepare us, protect us, or position us for something greater. When we trust His timing, we can rest in the assurance that everything will unfold according to His perfect will. The waiting process may be difficult, but it is never wasted. During this time, God is working not only in our circumstances, but also in our hearts. He is molding us, strengthening our faith, and teaching us to rely on Him completely. Every moment of waiting is an opportunity for growth and transformation. There will be times when God calls us to speak, to take action, or to stand up for truth and justice. In those moments, our words will carry more power because they are rooted in His truth and guided by His Spirit. But until then, we must learn to embrace the silence and trust that God is working behind the scenes. Silence is not just the absence of words, it is the presence of trust. It is choosing to believe that God's plans are good, His timing is perfect, and His love for us is unwavering. It is a declaration that we are placing our hope in Him rather than in our own abilities or circumstances. In the face of challenges, misunderstandings, or offenses, let us choose silence as an act of surrender to God. Let us trust that He is our defender, our provider, and our protector. Let us rest in the assurance that He is working all things for our good, even when we cannot see or understand His plans. May our silence be filled with faith, peace, and hope, and may we find comfort in knowing that God is with us every step of the way, guiding us, strengthening us, and preparing us for the blessings that lie ahead.